So I had this vanity that I purchased on Facebook Marketplace for $50 and decided to turn into two nightstands. It took a lot of Bondo to get them in decent shape and a lot of sanding and a lot of time, but they turned out beautifully. I was so pleased with the way they looked, and I posted them for sale and stared at them lovingly for days on end until the leaching started. The bleed through of the tannins onto the white body of the piece was impossible psychologically. Now I'm facing it again. I'm going to refinish them, and they're going to be similar to the original look after I had refinished them before, but there's some differences and they'll be better. The tannins in wood can leach through the paints and create kind of a yellow film. That film looks blotchy. If it was uniform, as is often the case in like an oil-based polyurethane, it would be less infuriating. I'm taking the hardware off, even though the drawer fronts are fine and I'll leave them as is. I got new hardware, or rather I got much older hardware that I'm pretty excited about how it's gonna match with the newly painted piece. Putting the old, oh, here are your tannins leaching. That's what it looks like, and it's all over the body. So we need to fix it, and I'll have to wait a few days after repainting to see if those tannins leach through again, because it's not always immediate. The first step after getting the hardware off and the drawers off is going to be cleaning the body. I've used these and abused them for about a year now. They've taken the abuse well, and based on the construction, my guess is this is close to 100 years old. The color and the style looked much newer, but based on the construction, I think these are really old. They're solid, and they have served me well despite the tannins driving me mad. I was pretty reluctant to refinish these because they worked so well as nightstands. And now I am pouring some shellac into a bowl, and that's what's going on. I'm using a foam brush because the shellac is going to ruin anything that it touches, or maybe the shellac wouldn't say it would ruin it, but it's going to make it harden, and so a cheap brush or a foam applicator is what you want to use. It's a very thin product, and so one of the concerns is running, drips and sags, and so when you're using shellac, you want to make sure that you are looking back after you paint some on to see if it's got drips and sags and runs, and doing it in the column of the piece, I found a lot of it would build up, and that was kind of a challenge, but I was very happy to finally be facing this issue and feel more confident than I did a year ago about my ability to fix it. And at minimum, I'm at least more prepared for it to fail. In case it does fail, I know the solution is going to be shellac and a recoat. So when I mix the paint together that I'll be using, I make sure I'll have plenty to recoat as needed that's in the same shade. I do 2 coats of shellac, and then in between those coats, I sand down the shellac because it has mechanical adhesion, which is the difference between chemical and mechanical. It's just to say sanding it down helps give it some grit and gives the tooth and lets the shellac hold on to it. This is my second coat now, and sanding it again, I feel like I've done a pretty solid job of making sure the areas where the bleed through is are very well protected. There are a lot of places where there's not a lot of bleed through. The top, for instance, looks pretty good. So I wasn't especially worried about the tops, but for good measure, I made sure to cover those with the shellac as well. Now I'm going to mix my paint. The way that I'm doing this is kind of interesting. I want to use a chalk paint because I like the way it looks, I like the way it feels, and I'm going to be making a chalk paint using interior paint from Behr, which is under the Dynasty products. I got those little sample cups in the Mix section of Home Depot for 50 cents a piece. So I think this is going to be $1.50 worth of that paint. And because I want it to be an ivory instead of a white, I'll be mixing in a a yellow with it. I'm straining it to make sure that I don't have any particles in the final product. And so that's 3 cups before it's time for me to get out the yellow. It looks exactly like mustard, and I spilled some on my car seat, on my driveway, on my person, on my purse, on my glasses. It was not a fun event, but I have this paint. It was $5 and it looks exactly like mustard. I now have a yellow car seat, in case you care to know. It kind of looks lime green when it's up against the brown of the seat, or the gray. Anyway, that's unrelated. I mix this. When you're mixing paint to make a new color, you always want to add the darker color to the lighter color rather than trying to add the lighter color to the darker color. A little bit will go a lot further than you think, and so if you try to add the dark to the light color, you may end up with just a lot more dark color. So add to the light color with the dark. And remember that when paint is wet, it is a lighter color than the final product. I was just holding up there the hardware that I have. It's porcelain, and I like it a lot. For my back, I don't want to be bending over any more than I have to, so I'm lifting this nightstand up and applying the paint that I have just created to the sections that have some dark spots. I'm not doing the full coat of this just yet. Doing this will also help me get an idea of what color it's going to be when it dries, because it will dry. I am going to turn this into chalk paint, which, if you use chalk paint and have it for a long time, you'll notice over time it will get thick, and that is no fun. So what I do is make my own chalk paint using calcium carbonate, aka chalk. I mix it separately with the amount of paint that I think I'll need, and so I have the remainder that I mixed without calcium carbonate in it. If I need to use it later, I can add the calcium carbonate and I'll have chalk paint again. You can add as much or as little as you want based on what you're looking for. This was too thick, so I also added Floetrol rather than adding water. Adding water can decrease the effectiveness of the paint and the durability. Floetrol is a good alternative to that, and it helps reduce dry time so that you're less likely to have brush strokes as well. As I said, you can add as much calcium carbonate to the paint as you want, and it makes the paint more sandable, which also helps reduce the look of brush marks. It's part of what I really like about chalk paint, that it goes bad, so to speak, is what I don't like, and so I solve for that issue by making my own chalk paint with mixed paints from Home Depot. It's super affordable, kind of amazingly affordable, and still very high quality paint. The sides here I have some worry about, but then that coat goes on, and I'm very pleased already. Every time ooh, now I'm watching paint dry. It's more fun than you think. For me, anyway. It's time for a second coat after at least an hour dry time. You really want to make sure that you allow the thin first coat to have time to dry properly before you put on a thin second coat. Resist the temptation to put on an incredibly thick coat. You don't need full coverage or necessarily want it for your first coat. It's going to make it more durable. It's going to make the final product a lot better, and you can do it, I promise. It was really hard for me to get to a place where I could put thin enough coats on. I repeatedly ended up with furniture that didn't look as good or work as well, and paint would peel. I learned my lesson again and again and again, and I gained the patience to apply a thin coat, apply a thin coat, and apply a thin coat. It is nice when the final coverage coat goes on, and the sanding in between now, this is the next day, I will sand with 220 grit all over the surface. This is to help with adhesion of the next coat, and to knock down any little nibs, if any schmutz got in the paint. This is an opportunity to sand it off rather than paint it in with the next coat of paint. And it's a good time to check for coverage in various areas. There are some places I see need more paint, and there's a place I find here where it's broken. It's not supposed to go back and forth like that. So I get out some wood glue. I think it's Titebond 3 that I'm using here. It's a very strong wood glue. There is also a little piece that's broken that I'm trying to clamp down, and my clamping efforts are not working. Not uncommon with the clamps, not the clamp's fault. But at an angle, it's just very challenging. So instead of doing that, I get out some painter's tape and I tape that area down. It's small enough that that is going to work just fine. The paint had gone into a plastic bag, and so had the paint brush, which I put in the fridge to slow down how quickly it would dry, so that I could keep it overnight that way. Now, I don't have furniture lifts that I forgot the name of. Painter's corners, there we go. Painter's corners. So I'm using cans of tuna here so that I can access the feet better. And I found another broken piece, or piece that was not properly secured, that I put glue on. I check the other side table to make sure that's not an issue there, and it's not. I take out my paintbrush that I had in the fridge with the cup of paint all night, and it is totally fine. I sprayed a little water on it before I put it in the fridge, and a little water on top of the cup before I put it in the fridge. Now I'm going for what I believe is the third coat. When you have lighter paints that you're working with, you're going to need to put on more coats. There's not really a way to get around that. Light colors in furniture have a lot of downsides. They can look beautiful and people like them, but the bleed through issue that's happening is one downside, and how many coats you need to have full coverage is another downside. But I like the upsides well enough that I'm happy to paint this white. I have the lighting at kind of strange angles here, and that is for my sake, to be able to see if there's anything that gets into the paint. Because it's been in the fridge overnight and I've been dealing with it out in the open repeatedly, the chance of contaminants is increasing in a way that after I had just strained it was not as high of a risk. And it does happen repeatedly that little bits of who knows what get into the paint, and with the strange lighting angle, I'm able to quickly find those and pull them out before the paint kind of becomes one with them. The original piece that you saw was a vanity, was before I had a router, and so I sawed it in half and then sanded the sides down, as I recall, to make them match more evenly. They are imperfect as can be, and I am accepting that for now. Putting my cup of paint back in to the fridge. I'm not going to let the paint brush last any longer without cleaning it, so I give that a good clean. It's a nice brush, and so I want to be nice to it. Taking out the drawers so that I can put on the new hardware, which is porcelain and ivory. And because it is ivory is why I wanted to paint the pieces ivory to match. It's going to match very well, And I think the new look is better than the old look, but some may disagree. Disagree with me if you like. I don't care. I love them both. And the cost of those was pretty great. It was only $2.50. Ooh, I'm going to get shelf liner. I have a few options on shelf liner. I have this vintage wallpaper that I got for $2 at Austin Creative Reuse. I have this standard issue wallpaper that's fine in blue. It's a pretty color. This third one that I immediately decide against because it clashes in kind of a strange way. I really want to be able to use this vintage wallpaper, but it's about 50 years old, I estimate, and it was in dry storage for about 50 years, I estimate, which means that it is so brittle, I can hardly look at it without it breaking. To address it being so dehydrated, I decide to try to reconstitute it or rehydrate it, and it is something I probably should have consulted my sister about. She is a paper wizard, and she would have known exactly what to do. What I'm doing is cutting it as straight as I can. It's not as straight as it should have been, really. If I could go back, I'd do it again. And then I am spraying it down with my famous formula. I didn't invent water at all. But I love water. It plays a large part in furniture refinishing, more than you might think. So I coat both of the front and the back with water, and it's quite a bit of water. And then I measure off the space that I'll need to cut them to go into the drawer. I'm just going to start with one and see how that goes, because I'm not super confident, because I have no reason to be super confident at this moment. I have used this wallpaper for some other things, and handling it is incredibly brittle. But I really love the way it looks. It's got these gold like flakes in it, and it complements the piece so well. I decide that the cut is good, so I spray into the drawer some water, and then I pour in some glue. Using a chip brush, I'm going to spread that around, so I've got a pretty substantial amount of watered down glue, and I place the wallpaper in it. It's so pleasing to me that this ends up working. But first I try to trim off the excess, and it starts tearing. I think to myself, this is like tissue. It's tissue paper. It's so delicate. So there I am perforating it like toilet paper. Greetings. I'm adorned in formal wear in order to give you a formal invitation to click like. I want to phone around and find out with furniture, and in order to do it creatively, I'm going to need your help. Engage with the channel, please. Another day has passed. You know, I have a job that's not this, so I have let the interior of the one piece of wallpaper that's 50 years old dry, and discovered that it is going to work very well. So I am ready to do the remainder of the pieces. The top two drawers of the tables had that blue lining in it, which I really liked in contrast to all the color, but I am so crazy about this wallpaper that I want to use it on all the other drawers. So this wallpaper is going to go in the 4 drawers on the bottom, and the blue lining is going to stay in the top 2 drawers. It is going to complement, they'll complement each other pretty well. Measuring this out, I am trying to figure out how to cut it, and I'm tearing it, and I'm terrified. I decided I'm gonna have to wait for it to dry some, but I don't wait around well, so I decided to jump to something else. Jumping to something else is sanding the side tables, because they have dried well enough for me to do that. Again, sanding it gives it some tooth for the next layer of this project's life. At this point, the coverage is pretty good. I am very pleased with it, and the color that it's dried to is lovely. There aren't a lot of there's not a lot of evidence of brush strokes. Thank you, Floetrol. And putting some of the drawers in, I get an idea of what it's going to look like. I'm very pleased, and cleaning it off is what I'm doing right before a clear coat. I'm using Deft clear wood finish. You can use it on paint as well. It is one of my favorite finishes. It's almost impossible to mess up. I got it for $4 at Habitat for Humanity. You could expect to pay about $16 elsewhere, so thank you, Habitat for Humanity, for that, as well as the hardware that I have. The Deft Clear Coat, they recommend at least an hour dry time in between, and I am going to follow their recommendations. The manufacturers make these recommendations with reasons that they have to make sure I'm out of the wind. I flip the nightstands around and then spray upside down for a couple seconds to make sure that it clears the valve. Then I'll wait an hour, during which time I feel more confident about going back to the wallpaper, which I had gotten a little too wet and it made it a different kind of delicate. Now it is possible to cut it, and some of the colors from the wallpaper have leaked onto the conference table that I have there, and that's fine. It's a project table. More water, more glue, using the chip brush, and then I wipe away the glue. Looks very nice. More water, more glue. Using the chip brush again, and the other pieces that I place are kind of challenging to get in. I am not very good at putting linings in drawers. I'm not sure why it isn't a skill that has kind of developed better. It seems like it should have to me. My other skills in furniture have developed nicely, but again, perforating here. Putting linings in drawers is just, I'm not very good at it. That's okay. They'll look pretty good anyway. It just feels like it takes me longer than it must take other people. More water, more glue, more brushing it on. That chip brush is going to be done for at that point. And this lining, getting it in is not going to work the first time, and then it's not going to work again, and then it's not going to work, and finally I get it to an acceptable enough place and wipe away the excess glue. Back to the body of the pieces, I sand them down, the tops, the sides, the fronts, all over, then wipe them down with a wet cloth to get any of that dust off of it. And I'm going to do another coat of the Deft finish. As soon as I get this coat of finish on, I can feel in the air that the rain is on its way, which is a terrible feeling when you're painting outside or using something outside. You don't want to paint with the Deft inside. You got to protect I'm protecting my hands there and my lungs, and I know the rain is coming, and I don't have a great way outside to keep these from getting wet. What I end up doing, it works just fine. I'm going to take them into my project room where I have an air purifier, open the window, close the door, and give them time. During the time, I'll put more coats on. After 3 more coats, which is overkill, they look lovely. I'm very pleased with them. I'm going to need to wait a few days to see if I've got any tannins leaching out, though, because sometimes they don't come out right away, as they didn't when I originally did the piece. Here's a picture of how it looks. I really like it, and it's as good as the first time. Next up, I'm going to be turning these into nightstands, and you can watch the entire process and learn how to do it. It's not as hard as you may think.